Hey, welcome back to another build video. This is the Hazen Boyd Company from Fine Scale Miniatures. So I had to do some research on this. So Fine Scale Miniatures is the company founded by George Sellios, who I guess is sort of the father of these woodcut laser kits. And he then later created the Franklin and South Manchester Railroad, and I always wondered why the Franklin South Manchester Railroad had the same initials as Fine Scale Miniatures. And he did that intentionally, apparently, and the company came first. And the railroad was actually built in the company building. Apparently, Fine Scale Miniatures closed down in about 2016, but you can still get their kits on the internet. This one apparently retailed for $280 when it came out, and I'm not sure when it came out, but that seems like it must have been a lot of money for the time. I got this on eBay for a little bit less than that. Some kits go for less than the list price, some for significantly more, just depends on how collectible they are. I've never built a Fine Scale Miniatures kit, so I have no idea what to expect, so this is going to be interesting. You do get a nice big poster with a lot of pictures of the finished kit. And then these are George Sellios' weathering tips. Here's building instructions. Alright, so there's a lot to deal with. I think that this video might just be me building the main building, but I don't really know. I don't really have a plan yet. So I'm going to look through all this stuff and formulate a plan, and we'll get started. Well, pretty much all craftsman kits start out the same, and that is labeling and bracing the walls. So here is a diagram that shows the trim areas. And so what I think I'm going to do is mark on the back of the walls, because this is the front's going to get primed. So mark on the back of the walls, like trim, something to indicate that these are going to be trim areas. And then another thing I want to do is to mark the walls so that I know which wall goes to which other wall, kind of labeling the walls. They didn't really give them numbers here. Finally, this sheet is the bracing diagram for the main walls, and so I need to brace the walls, and then once the walls are braced, then I will prime them and consider painting them. These pieces, I believe, are the concrete foundation. So here's a diagram of the concrete foundation, and so like this piece actually needs to have some wood removed, so there's a little bit of woodworking and I guess mitering that needs to be done to these pieces. So that'll take a little bit of time. I'm working on the bracing, and I think George really over-engineered the bracing diagrams, making them more difficult than they needed to be. For example, for this piece, this is the bracing diagram, and he has all of these center pieces cut angled to fit the top and coming all the way down to the bottom. And I don't think that's necessary, so I just did it like this. They're not going to be visible, and this extra little bit of space is not going to weaken the structure really anything significantly. So I don't think I really need to follow this. I think you can simplify your bracing a little bit. If this is your first kit and you don't know to simplify the bracing, then I can see why you would think that this was really complicated. Also, I figured out that the instructions are basically these large sheets, I don't know, 24 by 30 or something, and they're lettered A, B, C, D to go in order. And they're pretty much the text, and then the figures are all on these cards. So you have to jump between the text and the figures. And his instructions for building the building are not exactly in the order that I would put them in. So that might be something else that makes it a little more complicated. I want to try some different painting techniques for this building. If you look at old buildings, like old barns where the paint has worn away, you'll notice that they're really black and gray and kind of silver color. There's not really any brown, so I'm going to try and recreate that. So the starting point is this flat gray primer, enamel primer, and this is mainly to keep the wood from warping when I apply the acrylics. But it's also acting as a base color. And I'm just here working on a test piece. And the next color is folk art barnwood. And this goes on with a lot of brush strokes. It does not go on evenly, but that's going to be okay in this case. Normally I'm really fussy about that, but I think this is going to get all covered up in the subsequent painting techniques. You can see the coverage is pretty poor, but that's okay. I'm working with my test pieces and I've painted them with the barnwood color. And now I'm going to use a wash of Vallejo dark gray. And you can see that it's a very good quality wash because as soon as the brush strokes are on the piece, they disappear. The Vallejo paint is really high quality, but it's also expensive, so I'd like to use a cheap alternative if I can. So this is Americana black, and I'm going to try on this piece just a wash of the black. I'm trying to keep it about the same intensity as the Vallejo. So I'll let those dry and we'll see what the difference is. The wash is dried. This is the Vallejo and this is the Americana, and they look pretty close, but the Vallejo is a little bit better. I think you can see specks of pigment on the Americana, and it didn't spread out as evenly as the Vallejo did. But I think for this case, for what I'm doing, it's not going to make any difference. I think that this will be acceptable. The next step is I have Vallejo silver gray, and I'm going to dry brush this on, but it's going to be kind of a fairly heavy dry brush. In normal dry brushing, I would think that some of these areas went on way too heavy, but for what I'm doing here, it's really the look I'm going for. I want a really kind of inconsistent, blotchy look. Also, I am specifically going in the direction of the clapboard. I'm trying to decide what building color I want to use, and you already know because you've seen the thumbnail, but one of the candidates here is this Rookwood red, and I'm going to apply that with a sponge on one of my test pieces. And I was going to build this building just with very little paint. So I think that's one possibility. I actually did a previous sample with white, and that's what this looked like. I painted my windows and I've glued them into the walls, and also the doors, which are metal pieces. But I didn't put any of the acetate on yet. So I think it's finally time to start assembling the walls of the main building. With all the walls glued together, the next thing is the concrete base. So here's my concrete base, and you're supposed to miter the corners at 45 degrees, and I did the best I could do with that. It was kind of a challenging cut, even with the miter box. So the pieces sort of fit in. I got my concrete base pieces on, and they're pretty well sanded off. The corners look pretty good. Some of these are going to be hidden by docks. And then here's the elevator. So I think it's time to work on the roof. The roof comes on these cardboard panels, and you have to cut them out yourself, so they're not pre-cut. And they have these rafter lines, which is a little bit weird because I think to cut out the panel you lose the rafter lines, and they're supposed to tell you where you're supposed to put the rafters, like how far apart. I cut out this roof panel, and after some further reading in the instructions, it says you're supposed to turn it over and mark the rafter ends here. And on the sheets there's also the upper ceiling that goes in this location. And I didn't realize it at the time, but there's interior walls which are supposed to go behind this door if you leave this door open. They have these walls here. I think even if I had known that, I would have left the door closed. I'm just not interested in putting much interior into this building. I'm adding the shingles to the roof, and it's going pretty well. So this is the last piece of roof, and I've sprayed it with spray adhesive. I'm working on what they call the rear support, and they give you this template. So I've taken the top beam and I have used blue tack to hold it to the template. I've cut all my other pieces and I ran steel wool over them to get rid of the splinters. So the idea here is to glue the beams together with just a very small amount of glue so that you don't glue them to the template itself. I'm working on assembling the loading dock, and first thing I did was I did some color coding of all the different sizes of wood, and I have cut my planks and I'm going to try and assemble them and add the rafters. So the first thing I want to do is add, not the rafters, but the joists. So I'm going to add the joists. One of the buildings they call the coal shed, and this is the plan for it, and you just build it out of strips. These are the only clapboard pieces. So it's kind of interesting to try and build an entire building based just on a plan and strips of wood. But this is my result, so it's ready for some painting. Here's the plan for the support wall, so I also built it. It's my support wall and the various decks, loading docks, platforms, and some ladders. So it wasn't very exciting to build, probably not very exciting to watch it be built. Time now for some painting of this stuff. It seems like it was a lot of tedious work to get to this point, but I think I'm finally ready to glue the elevator to the building. So I did a lot of extra painting with the airbrush on the roof, added the rafters, still a lot of detail painting to add. For the elevator, I added the panes to the windows and I covered them with masking tape because I'm going to add weathering powders and then spray with dull coat, and I don't want to fog up the windows. And I did that because once the elevator is glued on, I will not be able to get in there to add the panes. The rest of the building is still open on the bottom, so I will be able to add the panes later. This is the coal shed, and after painting it gray and then the black wash, I did some black airbrushing, and then I put on some weathering powders and sprayed it with Tester's dull coat. And now I'm going to apply the roof. So I sprayed the cardboard with adhesive spray, and I'm going to use these black construction paper strips. And this idea came from a video from Jensen Trains, and I also talk about it in my video. I think the Carter Supply Building has this. It's construction paper spray painted gray, and then over the top of that it's spray painted black, and then you sand off the black to reveal the gray. And you also rough the edges a bit. So I think it gives a really nice tar paper appearance. At this point, I could call this done. I'll have to think about what I want to do to it further, if anything. Here's the main building. I covered it with weathering powders. I did a little more airbrushing on the roof of some different colors, covered it with weathering powders, and then I sprayed it with Tester's dull coat to seal the weathering powders. I just noticed I have some text there. I guess I need to cover that up. So now that I've sprayed it with the dull coat, I'm going to put the windows in. So that's the next step. I'm in the process of wrapping up the final details. Here are my various sub-assemblies. For the supporting wall, this is the thickness at which I miscalculated the height. It was a little short by this amount, so I put this strip in here to bring it up to height. Once I put it on the layout, it won't make any difference, but just for sitting on the shelf or whatever, it supports it, or for the photos. You can't see that, but anyway, I'm not going to attach it until I'm actually going to put it on the layout because it seems fragile. It could easily get busted off. And here's the loading dock, and here's this side loading dock. I have some ladders. This loading dock goes here, and there was supposed to be a little, what they call a pump house that sits in here, but I kind of broke it. I might be able to fix it and get it on. There was a lot of leftover pieces, partly because this is a storage shed, which I never really finished, obviously. There's a lot of leftover lumber, although some of it does go to the storage shed. A lot of detail castings. For these, I'm just going to wait and paint these with a bunch of the other castings that I have and at the time that I put the layout together. And then there was this set of wood, which I don't have any idea what this was actually for. It seems like it was never necessary. Then just a few other smatterings of pieces and stuff. So he certainly gives you extra. Also worth mentioning is there are some graphics, and I think these are about the highest quality graphics I've ever seen included with the kit.